On behalf of the team Calcutta Comparatists 1919, I take this privilege to warmly welcome you again on our 88th lecture of CC19 lecture series. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 is an independent forum for research scholars of humanities and social sciences. It carries the legacy of the academic study of Indian languages and literature envisioned by Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee and introduced in 1919 at the University of Calcutta. Later in 2005, a new department was established under the leadership of Professor Vishwanath Rai, and we belong from this department, and we are carrying this legacy, and we introduced this forum for organizing online lectures on the various interdisciplinary topics to be delivered by the distinguished academicians and scholars. I won't take much time today since all of us eagerly waiting to hear Professor Ananya Jahanara Kabir and Ari Gautier. So without further ado, I would now hand over the mic to Purvasha to formally introduce and to Aratrika to formally start the session of the today. Thank you, everyone. A good evening.
Thank you, Pratim. We are very excited for this session. In today's session, we will listen to Ari Gautier and Professor Ananya Jahanara Kabir. Ari Gautier is a French novelist from Pondicherry of Indo-Malagasy origin, based in Oslo. He writes historical fiction about Pondicherry's place in the world and works at Mela Huset, Norway, an institution promoting art and culture from the global south. Ananya Jahanara Kabir is Professor of English Literature in the Department of English at King's College London and winner of the Infosys Prize for the Humanities in 2018 and Humboldt Research Prize for the Alexander van Humboldt Foundation, Germany in 2019. She currently works on creolization as a historical process and cultural theory and its applicability to India. In May 2020, they co-founded the multilingual online cultural platform Untitled Creole that promotes their shared for a plural and creolized India. Ari and Ananya researched the historical basis for this vision in the transoceanic relationships that emerged through the mercantile and colonizing ventures of Europeans and the mutual impact of this and anterior commercial and transcultural circulations, particularly in the Indian Ocean world. Taking inspiration from creolization itself, they devised collaborative methodologies for the non-hierarchical dissemination of knowledge within and beyond academic audiences. Their project has been written about in print and online media, and they have been invited to present it to academic and popular audiences worldwide. This presentation draws on their collaborative work on Untitled Creole as well as Ari Gautier's historical fiction and Ananya Jahanara Kabir's research on Creole Indias. The term Creole is very rarely attached to studies or descriptions of Indian culture. Going against the grain, they work to reactivate memories of Creole through historical and literary critical investigations into creolization as cultural process that shaped life, experience, and imagination within peninsular India. In the presentation, they will give an overview of how they do so, that is, their methods and why they do so, the politics and poetics of praxis, paying particular attention to the epistemological and decolonizing structure they have conceptualized the Archipelago of Fragments. Now, I'd like to request our speakers to start their presentation.
Shall we start, or are we waiting for Aratrika to say something?
Yes, Aratrika will.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Purvasha, for this lovely introduction, and thanks to Pratim. And a very warm welcome to you, Professor Kabir and Monsieur Gautier. You may please start this lecture. The virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of Ari and myself, it's very nice to be here. Wish we could be there in person. I haven't been in Kolkata for more than 15 months now. And so, I'm really missing it. And after all, I am also an alumna of Calcutta University. So, it's really a very pleasant thing to be speaking to you. Congratulations for your forum. It's really important.
Thank you so much.
And both Ari and I have been noticing the work you've been doing, and we are very glad to be able to be part of your project. So let's start. Without further ado, as Purbasha, you mentioned in your introduction, creolization is not a concept that we customarily apply to, or we think of as applicable to any aspect of the culture of the geographic space known as Peninsular India, or known as India. So if we invoke it at all, it's usually to suggest that there was a gap, there's a lack. For example, Claude Markowitz, very famous historian, in 2017 wrote in an essay that Creole India had a small life and there was an early demise of Creole India. So in this way, if Creole India, the phrase is used at all, it's to say that it doesn't exist. It has no validity. We are doing the opposite. We suggest that it is indeed alive, it is indeed valid, and we want to show you why. Now, if the word Creole is attached at all to any aspect of Indianness, it is usually in the diaspora. You have you have the movement of people as indentured labor, famously, to islands in the Caribbean, to islands in the Pacific as well, such as Fiji, and of course the Indian Ocean, like Mauritius and Reunion. And in these islands, a creolization process had already set in. And of course, then the question is whether the Indians who were taken there participated in this process or rejected it, or, contributed something else to it. And all these ways of thinking about creolization or not, or even to reject it, is something to do usually with what happens on the islands. Again, very rarely do we turn the tide back to think about any impact all that might have on Peninsular India. So what Ari and I do is precisely that. We gather up all these debates, but more importantly, we don't just take them back to Peninsular India. We privilege the space, the coastlines of Peninsular India, to talk about Creole Indias. So let me start with a very quick genealogy of how I developed that term and where did I meet Ari and how did we start working on our project together. So if I could have the first image, I think we are showing some images. Can somebody show the first image, or I can also show it because it's on my share too. Purbasha, can you see if you can show the first image? Or maybe Pratim?
Yes, ma'am, I think Aratrika is working on it.
Okay. So this set of images, it's the really, I can also show them if there is an issue, because I just discovered that I can, let me try. Let me see if I can do it while we are waiting for Atrika.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Just adding it, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, there we go. So everybody can see that I have listed 4 articles of mine where I show the development of this concept in my own work, So in Article 1, you see that in that work, Beyond Coolitude and Creolite, I actually show pretty tikate, Aratrika. It's all right. Oops, what has happened there? I don't know what happened there, guys. Let me try again.
I can show now.
Okay, Tikase, please show it if you don't mind. That will be easier. So I was just showing a list of articles, as I said, where I have developed this concept bit by bit. In the first article, I want to remind you that our way of thinking about Creole Indias departs from the usual ways associated with the islands, be they the Caribbean islands or the Indian Ocean islands. And in my article, Coolitude and Creolite, I show that one model is the model of Creolite, that is Creole as an identity process of belonging for certain constituencies in the Caribbean, in the French Caribbean. And then there is also, of course, Khalto Rabali's concept of coolitude. He spoke about it last week to you, indeed, to this very forum. In this article, I think I show quite clearly how my vision of Creole India is going beyond these two. So people, of course, can, it's an open access. You can access it. But that's not all. As you can see in the next few articles, I developed also the sense that this model is really departing also in being a transoceanic model, okay? By which really and those are the articles 2, 3, 4, all those articles where you see the word transoceanic appearing. What do I mean by this? I mean that it is not just the creation of new culture between encounters, through encounters between masters and slaves. This is the typical model on the islands, the plantation worlds. But there is an encounter through a range of brokers, merchants, traders, translators, missionaries, musicians, artisans, pirates, men and women looking for adventure, looking for love and relationships. All these are brokers. They're cultural brokers, and their encounters are triggering creolization. And these encounters didn't just happen only in the Atlantic world, only in the Indian Ocean world, only in the Pacific. Rather, they are connecting these oceans. That's what I mean by transoceanic. And as the fourth article shows, I begin at about 2018, 2019, I really begin working on applying this encounter not just to islands, but actually island-like spaces, which are these enclaves on the Indian coastline. For example, the whole enclave of Goa, a rather large enclave, but still it's an enclave. We'll talk today about what we mean by enclave and how this works in our concept of Creole Indias. But basically, I started thinking more and more about Creole Indias in conjunction with the Indian coastline. And that's why we gave the image of the coastline to make the flyer for our talk. So what is it about this coastline? Now, we all know that from Sumati Ramaswamy's work, for example, that, this coastline is almost like the sari-clad lower body of Bharat Mata, So that from Sumati Ramaswamy's work, for example, that, this coast. Okay, so there is also a really this kind of anxiety that this border cannot be breached. It's a border whose integrity needs to be preserved. What we do is we argue the opposite, that the coastline is porous, and it is this porosity which is indicated by all these settlements, these forts, these lodges, these establishments founded by different European powers ever since Vasco da Gama appeared on the scene, disembarked in Calicut in 1498. After the Portuguese, Vasco da Gama's Portuguese, we have the Dutch, the Danes, the French, of course we have the British. And then when we have the British, we kind of forget that there were all these other powers. And we start focusing on what British India was about and what they left in their wake. These coastlines, the porosity they created, the settlements created on the coastline, they get eclipsed. We forget their importance. So what I started doing is looking more and more for what was going on in these coastlines. And I started developing the idea of coastlines from, in fact, settlements on the coastlines that I saw in West Africa. That's my second, article there. I started developing that model actually back to India. I gave a talk in Victoria Memorial, in fact, on Bengal and how the Hooghly, contours, the Hooghly district could be seen as one such series of enclaves. More about that later. But what happened was that I started realizing that I needed to know more about Pondicherry, because that was really a historical enclave which I needed to know more about to really, develop a hypothesis, which is that in these enclaves, in these coastal enclaves of India, something about the way culture was interacting in them made them hotspots for creolization. And so when I met Ari in 2019 through his historical novels, we started collaborating. Can we see the novels? Can we see image 2, please, Aratrika? That's the cover of Ari's novels. And these are the novels that we see. When we see them, we can talk to them more. But basically, Ari has written today two novels. One is called Karne Sekre de Lakshmi, and the other is Le Tinnai. And both are about Pondicherry, and both are actually, in a way, very important for us to think about creolization and Pondicherry. But it is Le Tinnai which was my starting point. So, Ari, over to you. I want you to tell us a little bit about, I think we're going to see the image at any minute. Yes, there we go. Do you see your novels? Ari, we can't hear you. Can we not unmute?
That's good.
There you go.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yeah. Ari, I want you to tell us a little bit about each novel so that people who don't know your work may have some idea about what you're talking about in each, and then we'll come to the Tinnai, or, yeah.
Yeah, about the topic we are talking. Yeah, first of all, thank you, Prabhasha and Rantrika and our team for inviting us. It's really an honor to be here. And as Ananya said, yeah, these two novels I've written, it's basically historical novels about Pondicherry. Why historical novels? Because I found out when I started to write that there are very few local writers, born from Pondicherry, writing about themselves. So what is the right way to trigger that memory that we are talking? Because the post-colonial period of Pondicherry has been totally ignored, and the Franco-Pondicherrian community is not able to even write their own story. So this is why I came to, I took the decision to write about Pondicherry. And of course, because I like history, and there's a way to, I wanted to tell the story also. So Karne Sekre de Lakshmi, even though it's very contemporary about Lakshmi with the elephant and the three-legged dog, which is tripod dog Baba, and the flying fish, which is Alphonse. But the background of the novel is the history of Pondicherry, from pre-colonial to the post-colonial and during the colonial period. So and Le Tinnai, it's totally different because I wanted to take this architectural space to tell the story of Pondicherry, which relate to the oceans and also to the ground, you see. And there's a va-et-vient, constant va-et-vient between the oceans and the Tinnai itself. So this is what I want to write the story. And also the main idea of writing the story is to introduce Lourdes, which is my Creole character, because for 350 years, the French people lived in India, and nobody till now haven't even written anything about the Creole people. I'm talking in fiction.
Yeah.
They might have written some essays and mentioned them here and there, but they don't really, they are part of the invisible part of the society, but nobody wants to talk about. So that is fun, yeah.
I'm just going to stop you there, Ari, for a second, because I think we should tell people a little bit more about two things. And I'll do that since I've studied the novel in great detail. I want to really remind ourselves about how particularly Le Tinnai allowed me to understand, like in a eureka moment, in an epiphanic moment, that what Pondicherry actually historically, what Pondicherry was historically and therefore is as a post-colonial space. The idea that Pondicherry was a contact zone. You see, a contact zone which then became a hub for creolization, and therefore it allowed me to understand what was going on in other enclaves even more clearly. Now, this is why you are mentioning the oceans, you know. In the storyline, there is a Tinnai in a house, and people keep coming to this Tinnai from different parts of the world because of the seas that are washing up on the, you know, the shoreline on which Pondicherry is situated. And the stories they bring unfold gradually this very complex history of how Pondicherry was formed through maritime encounter. But there are different characters in the novel who are sitting on the Tinai and exchanging stories. And one of the people who keeps recurring, even though she is not a protagonist, is the character called Lourdes, whom you have just mentioned. And in your novel, you make it clear you want us to know what she stands for. In your narratorial voice, you explain that there is a community called the Bas Creole, or the Low, Bas as in low, right, in French, the Low Creoles. There's also a High Creole, the Haut Creole, but they are basically quite privileged, right? They are like historically the descendants of white French people who kept lording it over Pondicherry, in kind of equivalent of gated communities in this area, which even now as tourists we can go and see in Pondicherry, like, the White Town, right, between the boulevards. But there is another community which is also called, use the word Creole, but they are qualified as being the Low Creoles. And this community is kind of mixed race, has has an unusual way of speaking, has a way of life which is very specific, and you make Lourdes the representative of it. Yesterday you found a photo, right? Which
because as I said, my next novel, which I called Pondicherry Saga Creole, is about how Pondicherry is the Creole space, and Animesh Roy has written this interesting book, which was prefaced by Edouard Glisson himself. So if Edouard Glisson acknowledged that Animesh Roy book was talking about Creole Pondicherry, so there is a Creole space, and so which I want to explore. And during my research, I found this beautiful picture. Is the picture here?
There is. It is image 3.
Yeah, image 3.
So image 3, we will see exactly what the Creole lady from Pondicherry looks like. Because basically the image is of a lady from the so-called Bas Creole.
Exactly. So it is Alice Rosario. And as you see, the name is a Portuguese name, Rosario. There is Rosario and De Rosario also. So there are 2 different Rosarios in Pondicherry, which is kind of a huge family. And so this Rosario belongs to, as they call, the Bas Creole, because the Bas Creole, here's Tante Rosario, Tante Alice Rosario, in 1926. And as they call the Bas Creole, because the Bas Creole are the mix of the rest of the European other than French. So they are Scottish, they are Portuguese, Danes, Dutch, Germans, all, even Irish. And in the same blog, there was another picture called Les Smith.
I saw that.
Yeah, you saw that, right? Les Smith. So Smith Girard, I know, is a friend of mine. So I immediately sent the picture because Smith comes from a very, I don't know if he's Irish or Scottish, but he's something Smith. So I asked him, but he said, no, I don't know himself. He doesn't know himself if they are part of the same family. So just to say that the Bas Creole are the rest of the mixed people which are not French, which are not the French descendant. So that's what they call Bas Creole, and they are kind of minority, and also kind of rejected. They're seen like a different community because the way they speak, the way they eat, the way they dress, even their way of life is totally different from either the Tamilian, the Franco-Tamilian, and the French people. So that is why that Creole community is very essential in my narrative, because I want to bring out this forgotten or unknown element of the Pondicherry society in my novel.
But there is a bit of an ambiguity there, Ari, if I may say so, because if they're so cut off and so different from everyone, how can we think about Pondicherry being a Creole space if the only Creole element within them are so cut off from everyone? So I think actually,
it's interesting. It's interesting, Ananya, what you're saying, because if you see that community as only something we call not through culture, the creolization, only through métissage, as you can say, because they are mixed. Genealogy, I'm talking. And if you think that only that creolization is only because they are mixed, it's wrong, because even Pondicherry, among the Franco-Tamilians, there is a creolization which is happening, but we not called that creolization is not visible because we are not called Creole. So we also think that Creole people are only Creole, but actually, in fact, the entire Pondicherry space is a Creole space.
So let me then clarify what actually is going on. As a writer in Tinai, you wrote about Lourdes, a figure whom you clarified was from the Ba Creole group of Pondicherry, historically created out of what we would call in French métissage, or mixture, biological mixture between
biological mixture. That's what I want to say.
Different kinds of people.
Exactly.
Put it very bluntly, and they are definitely so mixed up that there was a clear, almost snobbish distinction between the very refined Haut Creoles, who are racially pure and speaking perfect French and in power, and the opposite end of the spectrum was this other group, also with the word Creole in their community name, but very different very different. They're not valorized at all. They're stigmatized, in fact. At the same time, in your novel, you took pains to show how the culture that Lourdes generates or bears, even in her body, the food she makes, the way she speaks, something between French, her mode of speaking, the furniture associated with her. We'll come to that later in the talk. All these elements of culture that accrue around this figure are not actually hermetically sealed. They are somehow, again, diffusing in around her, and all the other protagonists are sharing bit by bit, or whether they like it or not, they are dependent on her. For example, she brings all these delicious dishes, and only because they eat those dishes can everybody continue talking and exchanging stories. So the life on the Tinai, the social life of the Tinai, and the life of the narrative itself is generated by Creole, by the Ba Creole figure, by Lourdes. So I think that it's really important to make, as a critic, I therefore make the distinction, but also show analytically how there is a Creole and there's Creolization. So different communities in Pondicherry, such as the community you are from, the Franco-Tamilian community, is not technically a Creole community because no evident biological métissage happened, but culturally it's Creolized.
Absolutely.
And that's the important thing that we want to show in our work, that Creole Indias, there's a cultural Creolization radiating out from these Creole, very kind of like, shall we say, the deepest layer of Creolization, which is historically sedimented in Creole, the Ba Creole kind of families, such as that represented by this lady, Alice Rosario, that we see in this beautiful image. We don't need to show the image anymore, Aratrika. So if you take it away for the moment, I think we can continue the rest of the talk. Thank you, just with all of us on the screen. So Ari, I want to ask you, I want to continue talking about Alice Rosario. A little while ago, you reminded us that Rosario is a Portuguese surname.
Yeah.
Tell us, how did the Portuguese arrive in Pondicherry? We all think that Pondicherry is a French enclave. It's a remnant of French India. You yourself speak and write in French because of that. And what is the Portuguese doing there?
I mean, the Portuguese was the first settlers. The first settlers in Pondicherry among Europeans were the Portuguese, but they didn't stay for long. As Stefan Jayasilan rightly said, because Portuguese, they were in Nagapattinam, in Porto Novo, and then slowly moved to Pondicherry, and then they moved to Cunimedo. From Cunimedo, they moved out. So they were there. And maybe at that time, I think this is prior to 1673, so it must be around 15, something like that. Yeah. So there was no evidence of Portuguese settlement or even descendants. But I think the Portuguese came back to Goa. You see, because there was a strong connection between Pondicherry and Goa, and between families also. There was a strong family connection between those people. So, for example, like Lourdes, Lourdes Mascarena, as I called her, has a very interesting pedigree because she comes from a very old Portuguese aristocrat family. From her grandmother belonged to the Mascarena family. Mascarena Maison means house of Mascarena, the Mertola, in the Beja districts. So they made fortune in the mine exploitation. So they were very rich. But for some reason or the other, like all rich family, there is a downfall. So the grandmother is being sent to India as orphelin du roi, means there were women who were sent to marry the European in India, and since they were not allowed to marry indigenous women, so the king of Portugal used to send women to India, and they were called orphan of the king, the king's orphans.
Yeah.
So she was sent to Chennai, and then she was sent to Goa in the Santa Maria the Misericordia convent.
Yeah.
So she was in the convent of Santa Maria Misericordia. So then she got married to a Portuguese and went to Chennai. But that guy, he died in an accident. And then she ran away from Chennai. She goes to Madras, and she goes and try to find a new life in Tranquebar. So which is a Dutch, Danish enclave. So from Danish enclave, she finds a Frenchman and comes to Pondicherry. So you know how you can move. So there is no kind of straight line. They come from Portugal and they landed up in Pondicherry. So there is different ways of you move within different enclaves. So this is what I want to show through Lourdes.
I will come back to that movement at the end. We will come back to it at the end of the talk, but maybe we can already kind of point out a couple of things from this the fictional. You have given a fictional genealogy of Lourdes, but this is based in historical fact that there were such women. They were moving around. I mean, there was the orphans of the king. They were sent out in shipments to marry the bachelor Portuguese, who were also coming on the mission of colonization and settling in India. But the point is that these women, once they arrived, they were not fixed. They became like loose cannons and started as her mother did. They moved. How did they move and where did they move to? They moved from enclave to enclave. It doesn't matter that she came from Portugal. She moved to Madras. She moved to Tranquebar. And then finally they ended up in Pondicherry. So this kind of movement is exactly how creolization also started snowballing. We want to move away from this a bit of a kind of stereotyped misunderstanding that creolization as a model or as a theory of culture must only pertain to some kind of binaries, that A and B encounter each other and the product C happens, which is creolization. No, that Homi Bhabha explained that as hybridity. Somebody else can call that métissage. We are not talking about that. We are talking about unpredictable and swirled and snowballing effects where different kinds of influences are coming in and are just gaining in kind of acceleration and unpredictability. And a figure like Lourdes moving through these different settlements, or indeed her female ancestors moving through different settlements, and she lands up in Pondicherry. This is the kind of model that, they're enacting the model basically through their through this genealogy. But the other thing I want to say is that, Ari, what we've been the work we've been doing in the past few months in particular has shown us how it's not even Goa, which is the starting point for the Portuguese, this Portuguese influence to manifest itself in the way you have shown us through Lourdes. It is actually the Malabar coast. And that's not a surprise, because that's where the Malabar is where Vasco da Gama first disembarked, and near Calicut. And even today, we have similar communities, parallel, shall we say, to the Bar Creole communities of Pondicherry. We have a similar community in and around Fort Kochi, and they are called, linguists say that they speak Cochin Creole, which is also quite a dying language. I think the last speaker of Cochin Creole died. This is our colleague, Hugo Cardoso, the linguist of Luso-Asian Creoles, who has done the work on Cochin Creole. So the language they speak can be called Cochin Creole, but the community themselves does not necessarily call themselves Creole. In Malayalam, the word they use for themselves is Parangi. And this is a very interesting word because it is familiar to some of us, even in Bengal, as Firingi. It's the same word as we know attached to the figure of Anthony Firingi, for instance. And indeed, if you look at these parallels, there are many happening in the Hooghly district too. Not just Anthony Firingi, who moved like Lourdes between Serampur and Chandanagar, but even the figure of De Rosio, who actually was De Rosario. Henry De Rosio himself came from a Eurasian family, another label which is indistinct and collapses many different genealogies and possibilities within it. And one of the strands was Portuguese. But because British India was in the ascendancy, they were in Kolkata, it was deemed expedient and strategic to change the name to something that sounded a little less Portuguese and maybe a little more British. So the name was changed to Henry De Rosio. Go back to the Malabar coast. Really, this community, I would say, is one of the oldest Creole communities of India. And they are the ones also, of course, they have all those surnames, the De Rosarios, the De Silvas, the Mascarenas, the Cruz, the Fernandez, the whole lot, okay? Very interesting, but where is the word? The word Parangi, which is the Malayali pronunciation or assimilation of the word Firangi, this is the Arab word, actually, as many people may know. This is the Arab word for foreigner, for European. It was actually formed during the Arab encounter with the Franks in medieval times, during the Crusades. So from Franks, which is the ancient ethnic group from which the word France comes, the Arabs encountered the Franks and they called them Farang. From there, the Arabs carried this word wherever they went. And Ari, maybe you should tell us a little bit here about the very interesting role that the Arabs played on that same maritime coast, the Malabar coast, the Coromandel coast, because this is also the research you're doing. And I think it'll help us also broaden our understanding and complicate our understanding of Creole Indias a little bit more. So over to you about the
Malabar. The Arab, as I said, my next novel, the Maracaier community. Again, don't even call community because Maracaier is not a community actually. It was it's a distinction. You see, it's just a word that you put next to your name, but slowly it developed as a community. But Maracaiers are very interesting because they are the descendants of the first Arab traders who came to the Malabar coast, and there itself. But unlike Europeans, the first Arabs, they happily married the indigenous woman, and from Malabar coast up to Kanyakumari and even little more to Tukudi. So the entire Arab traders were settled, and they were doing business for centuries before the European came. So there itself, from like, for example, if you take the connection between Oman, the Arabian Peninsula, to India, there's a strong connection, which again, that memory is not activated. People are still trying to find out what is the strong connection. But historical evidence of there through language, through culture, through food, through music also. But then again, there is very few historians who has really studied and who has revealed this information. So slowly, people are doing a lot of research. But I'm very much interested, and this is again another community I want to bring in my novels. So this is the Arab descendants, the Maraicayas.
And also Mapulas, the Mapula Christian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the Maraicayas are one way of designating or self-designating this group. Of course, there's been a lot of research also which shows that this is not necessarily, as you say, a community nomenclature per se. Until, as usual, the colonialists, the British came and they wanted to put names and
see, even the name itself is still not really settled. You see,
yeah,
because in Tamil Nadu they call it Marakalam, means Mara means wood.
Yeah.
You see, Kalam means the captain of the wood. So people they were traveling on boats. So the captain is called Kalam, and then Maram Kalam. But if you go in the Malabar coast, Marakalam, Maraicaya has a different meaning. So even the words, the name is not really settled.
I mean, the main thing is that around the time that Vasco da Gama arrived on the coast on the Malabar coast, there was a lot of maritime interaction between the peoples of the coast and others who were by their very nature seafaring, and there was a lot of mobility. There was a lot of, therefore, cultural, kind of transformation and circulation already in place. And the people who were kind of at the helm of these affairs were these Muslim maritime communities. And they had one foot in the ocean and one foot on land. They were very, very amphibian in fact, in their self constitution. When the Portuguese arrived, they were and then later the Dutch, they were in competition in the first century, at least, with these groups for because these groups had a different way of thinking about doing trade on the coastlines. And, the Portuguese, the Europeans had different ideas. Whatever, there was stiff competition but there was also interaction. This is the interesting thing about creolization, especially in these coastal enclaves. It's never like, let me bring you my food and just sit down and eat with you. It's always kind of, there's competition, there's negotiation, there's violence, there's a lot that's actually happening, push and pull, and things almost like, when you have two flints, you strike against each other, and then the spark, you don't know when it's going to arrive. It's like that. It's unpredictable as well, but it's never simple. So in this push and pull between, for power, for naval power, for power of the coastline, between the already established Muslim maritime groups and the new Europeans, they had to also call each other things, they had to devise ways of calling each other. So the word Parangi started like being a word that Malayalam evolved to describe these Europeans. And it's straight from the word Firangi. But because Malayalam usually changes the F sound to P, it became Parangi. Now, the interesting thing is this word started soon being used, not just for people who were coming and just, like the foreigners, but for communities that were also transformed because of these foreigners. So a Creole community, which was created out of an admixture of different groups, like the Bar Creole community of Pondicherry, till today, they use the word Parangi for themselves. So this is a very interesting transfer of the word from just meaning white foreigner to a group that remembers its genealogical connection with Europe, but has transformed and transforms the local landscape. So this is the Parangi community, and there's a lot of novels written about them, both by people who belong to the community and those who are affiliated with the community because they live in the same space but are not genealogically of it. In a similar way, as Ari has written, of the Bar Creole community of Pondicherry without himself being of the Bar Creole community, but being of the Franco-Tamil community, which is in proximity. So in other words, what we observe in our research is that there's parallel cultural developments in all these enclaves, whether you're looking at Malabar Coast, whether you're looking at Pondicherry, or even if you go all the way up to Bengal. So in the last 10 minutes, I think, of the time we have with here, we'll wrap up quickly so that if there are questions, we'd love to take them too. But basically what we want to say is, how do we make sense of these dots? Okay, so they exist. There are Bar Creoles here, there are Parankis there. They seem to share the same food. The same Portuguese words are moving between their different languages that they speak and kind of linking or becoming kind of like echoes in each language. They have similar surnames. They're sitting on similar looking chairs, like the photo we saw of Alice Rosario. Do we have a theoretical way of linking all this up? How do we do it? So this is where Ari and I came up with this concept of the Archipelago of Fragments. Just as Ari described the way Lud's mother and grandmother move through different settlements, that's actually that kind of vector of movement. If we conduct it conceptually and memorially, we land up with a structure which is an archipelagic structure. The interesting thing about our archipelagic structure is that it's not out there in the ocean. It is not a geological archipelago. We can say the Caribbean is an archipelago. The Mascarenes, where Mauritius is, Reunion is an archipelago. They're archipelagos, they're groups of islands in the ocean. We are taking the concept and we are trying to see if the peninsula of the Deccan Peninsula of India itself cannot be conceived of as connected by an archipelago of settlements, enclaves, coastal enclaves. So we draw these lines on the landmass itself with the intention deliberately of, if you remember, when I started, I said the idea of the Indian coastline is that it keeps the territory of India integral. There is an integrity. We are actually saying that's causing a lot of problems. That has caused a lot of philosophical problems, political problems. We want to think about an alternative structure. We are deliberately fracturing that integrity through the idea of the Archipelago of Fragments. And yet there is a connectivity, which is the fragments are connecting up, right? These different enclaves are connecting up. So I want to end with this, with the view to what we mean by, therefore, the two vectors that of memory, of remembering the past. We've already kind of sketched them out a little bit through our discussion of Ari's work, but to make them more precise, we will use the word transoceanic and littoral. So littoral as in coastal. So there are two memory circuits that we want to think about, and they're intersecting memory circuits. One is transoceanic, connecting the oceans. The other is coastal, connecting the coastline itself, in this case, the coastline of India. So can we have the fourth image, please, Aratrika? Because I think that's a very concrete example of how these two circuits of memory intersect. And that will be, I think, the way we'll end. No, Ari? That will be our last point. So yep. let's have the image.
Aratrika, are you here?
If I'm trying to show the image.
She's doing it. This image, guys, let me tell you what the image is about. It's an image of a piece of furniture, which I saw circulated in a Facebook group I belong to called Calcutta Connected, or maybe you know this group, So this was a very humble piece of furniture, and it triggered an enormous discussion and about over 1,000 likes. When you see the piece of furniture, you'll know what I'm talking about. I actually put the Facebook page picture so you can see that at last count it had 1.3K likes and nearly 1,000 comments. So what is this? Okay. And it's so decrepit also, So, what is the excitement about this? Well, people started writing in the comments, oh, this is what we used to call a mid-chef. This is what we call a mil-chef, which is what we call a mid-chef. Some people were like, it's a meat-safe. They're like, why is it a meat-safe? Nobody ever kept meat in it. Then people remembered that there were little katoras of water on which each leg would be kept to prevent the ants from going in. Basically, it's a cupboard in certain kinds of kitchens in which certain kinds of prepared food was stored before the advent of refrigeration. And this food, when you see the comments, there are what? There are cakes, there are meatloafs, there are vindalus, there are all kinds of things, there are sorbetels, there are all sorts of foodstuffs kept in this meat safe, which are actually pertaining to a cultural world that we might think of very simply as, oh, that's all, for example, Anglo-Indian. But that very term Anglo-Indian actually was a very late way of collapsing all these Creole communities all around the coastlines. And the meat safe belongs to that world. Now, Ari, I showed you this picture because I was curious and I said, maybe they have something like this in Pondicherry as well. So I showed him this picture. And what did you say, Ari? What was your response to it?
You say in my page 32, I'm writing.
Yes.
So my house was 3 rooms, and at the end of the corridor, we had the kitchen, and in this kitchen we had one buffet, black buffet, as a only furniture, and in that buffet we had all our what you call plates and
yes.
everything which was there, which was covered with a newspaper that Lourdes had the keep on changing it because the newspaper were in Tamil, and that's the only way I could learn Tamil in that buffet through the newspaper, because since my father always never allowed us to speak Tamil, there's one way that I could have access to Tamil language. It was through this paper which was inside this buffet. And so I'm talking about this buffet in my book.
Yeah.
So that was a nice coincidence.
The amazing thing is, when I saw this word buffet in your book, I had even once asked you, can you explain to me what is this piece of furniture? Because of course, when we say buffet in English, we mean something completely different, right? So you told me, you described it in a certain way, and I said, oh, I think it's a kind of sideboard. And you said, yeah, it's a sideboard. And indeed, Blake Smith, in his translation of your book into English, which will appear very soon in India, he also uses the word sideboard. But actually, we realize, seeing the picture, that it's a meat safe or a mit safe or whatever the Bengalis want to call it, in the creolized way. So now the point is, you see, this is what we mean by the Archipelago of Fragments. These pieces of furniture, whether it's a chair, whether it's a meat safe, whether it's an armoire, whether it's a jannal or janla, these pieces of furniture or elements of the domestic, setup, they are dispersed across India. But if you track where did they first appear, they appeared in these Creole enclaves. Of course, at some point, Europeans brought the idea of the buffet or the meat safe to India. But the memory of it is now traveling along the coastlines of India. We don't have to go back to Europe to think about the meat safe. Everybody, all those 858 people who commented on the meat safe were from India. Whether some of them were saying this is an Anglo-Indian thing, others were saying no, it's a Bengali thing, others were talking about this meat safe from North India, So this thing has proliferated everywhere. And then when we come to Pondicherry, we may have different names for it, but we immediately recognize the shape and the function. But more than just its function, its its practical function, clearly, as Ari's novel shows, it has a very important emotional and symbolic function. It is the place in which the protagonist child is negotiating between different forms of cultural education and learning ultimately how to put it all together, because he's hanging out in the kitchen with Lourdes, the Bar Creole nurse and cook of the family. So I say, this is the way we want to explain what we mean by transoceanic circuits of memory and littoral circuits of memory. And this meat safe is a very good example of how these two memory circuits intersect. And the mid-safe too can be seen as a kind of symbol of the contact zone itself. It's coming out of there, but it's also working as a metaphor or a stand-in for the contact zone. So I think we will end here, because what we want to do is we wanted to use this talk not just to show where my research is taking us and where Ari's fiction is taking him, but also where they intersect and how together we do our work together, on Creole Indias as a research project, and of course on Tinai Creole as a kind of, outward facing way of disseminating our work to the public at large. So Ari, if you want to add anything in closing, I'm giving you the last word before we hand over to
No,
Ari.
I'm good. I saw this buffet. It reminds me exactly the buffet that I had in my house, because there's no handle here. And as I said in my novel, my brother and I, we were fighting over to get some food out of that, and we broke the handle. And my father never replaced the handle because to punish us. So it reminds me of it.
Well, Creole Indias is not necessarily glamorous. It is often marginalized.
It's negotiation. It's violence. It's also
Yeah, and it has to be activated, like we saw how just this one picture posted on a Facebook page activated and triggered so much of discussion and memory around it. So everybody, we'll end here. We're waiting for some questions. I hope there are some. And thank you all, Calcutta Comparatists 1919, for giving us the chance to tell you our story and show you our research path. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful session. Really fascinating. I was thinking of Estridal's traveling memory travels.
Yes, of course. She's somebody, of course, whose work is very interesting. She talks about transcultural memory, traveling memory.
Yes.
Astrid Earl, Ari, my colleague at Frankfurt,
Yes, she's from
Frankfurt, and they're a very strong memory studies group there. So it certainly fits in, absolutely. But what we are doing, which is slightly, I think, our contribution to this overall discourse, is that we're really showing how material culture are the ways in which emotions and memories do travel, through the way people build lives around themselves with things and objects, and the way human beings interact with those objects, and that emotional charge, as well as the history of the objects together makes the memory, gives the memory value in a way.
Thank
Thank you so much. Like I was listening to the lecture and I was thinking, okay, we have to plan the next trip to Pondicherry. Really go and witness the culture and everything there. So I was also thinking if Pratim can, Pratim is working on Southeast Asian travelogues. So yeah, India connection with India, the Indians writing travelogues in Southeast Asia. So have you found anything like creolization process there?
Are you asking us or asking Pratim?
All of you. Just a query because I don't have much idea about travelogues.
I have something, but I'm not going to reveal today. I will ask you to come tomorrow on Tinai Creole, because I got a surprise for my collaboratrice, as I said 2 days back, and which I'm going to talk about a certain particular community and how it got creolized in Southeast Asia.
Wow.
So come tomorrow on the Tinai please.
Well, that is, of course, a surprise even to me. I don't know which particular community Ari is going to be talking about. But, of course, in general, and this is something I am discovering more and more in my work. Ari, obviously, is also doing this in his own thinking. Southeast Asia is a huge space for creolization in this archipelagic structure we are conceptualizing because of the Portuguese again. And if you think about places like Malacca, like Singapore, Penang, they have very, very similar life worlds to some of these enclaves that we are familiar with, So there is certainly a huge, extension of the story to Southeast Asia. And Sri Lanka is another part of the story, all these places, interestingly enough, as we know, also have very ancient connections with the Indic world. So we didn't have to wait for the Europeans. The Cheras and the Cholas and all these people were also moving back. And the Arabs, as we said, there was always interconnectivity between these island worlds and peninsular worlds, of the Eastern Indian Ocean, where the Bay of Bengal and our coastlines of India is like one limit. But when the Europeans came, they added their own layer and accelerated the process and took it in a certain direction, which again we see parallels, we see similarities, and we see movement back and forth. So maybe Pratim has somewhere. I mean, I'd be very interested to know exactly what kinds of travelogues, written by whom, for example, that he's and in which language he's referring to. But for sure, there's a very interesting subject to do more work on. Anyway, Ari will show us the path tomorrow. We are that's the start.
We'll be there.
We're still waiting for some questions from YouTube. Pratim's network is, I think, it's disturbing.
Yeah, it's coming and going.
Yes. If Purbasha has by then some questions, then we can wait for some questions from the audience.
I cannot see any questions on the comments. Maybe people, I don't know if there's any other way in which you are also collecting comments or questions.
I know in the chat box only. People can post their any comments, any questions. It's all welcome in the chat box. Please post your questions and comments.
But of course, we are on the Tinai Creole every week, so people can also rock up there.
Yeah.
Yes. So we are very used to dealing with people and questions and comments in this online mode because we are forced to. That's the way we are operating, for the last year.
New normal kind of.
Yeah. So we can definitely also field the questions tomorrow if people, for example, if people are still thinking about them today. But it was a very good opportunity to bring to you some of our methods, as we said, and some of the reasons why we are working on it. I think the most important thing we want to say is that, of course, this is for Ari. He's writing fiction. For me, I'm doing my research. So we don't need reasons to write fiction or do research. But together, certainly, we feel this is a political project too, which has certain implications for the way communities are conceived of, valorized, and ranked in hierarchy, in contemporary India. And we want to show that there is an alternative way of thinking about community and thinking about culture and where what's important, and why. So that's also another way of using the Archipelago of Fragments, that it's okay to be fragmented, but we can still be important and have a voice of resistance through the fragments.
Even Pratim is here, yeah.
Yes, Pratim.
Yes, I think the thing Artika mentioned, since I like most of the thing which I have found in travel writing about Burma, and since like both of us, Artika and me, both of us working together in a project on Burma, and there I found the travelogues written by Maharishi Devendranath Tagore, or Pullman Brahman is there, and even in Rabindranath Japan Jatri, there's a mention of the Rangoon part. Even also Kalachar Dalal also is there, and Shaula Devi Chaudhary. So interesting thing is I didn't find till now any mention of particular any community. I haven't till now, but the thing which is quite interesting that the connection and the Chettiar community is particularly everyone is mentioning there. And the surprisingly, it was interesting that Chettiar was already there before the British, and they are already there in for business. And if someone is working on the business communities, which is the Indian and based on Southeast Asia, that is really interesting for him. So that one thing I find quite interesting. And another thing, while working on this Burmese and the travelogue written in Bengali, it is like quite interesting that they are talking about the settlement colonies. Like there is a particular one travel writing which is written by Umar Prasad Mukhopadhyay. It's
Mhm.
named Parma Muluke, and there will get to see that the settlement colonies, what is the situation of and how are they are living, and especially they are like everyone is mentioning quite interestingly that চীনের লোক আর লাইক অপ্রেসিং এন্ড চীনারা তাদের মদ খাইয়ে বাঙালি কুলিদের সমস্ত টাকা নিয়ে নিচ্ছে. So it is like quite interesting. However, I
This is
think
quite
you have, like,
interesting. Yeah.
yes, like, I mean the since from then I mean I can trace like the Chin Bangla China bhai bhai is not there. I guess. So whatever it is. So but it is like quite interesting for me. But yes, there's like numerous mention you will find that how they are like earning, how they are like traveling through the ship, and what is their condition there. So these are sort of things you'll find, and I am particularly like currently I am reading these travelers which is like on Burma and Thailand. So I found these things which is like quite caught my attention there. So anyway, I will love to speak Arif in some near
Oh, Ari,
future.
Ari is your person for Chettiars, for Burma. I think, Ari, you should tell them a little bit also about the Karne
Yes,
Sekre,
please.
because also it will interest Aratrika about her work on coolies, in
Yeah.
internal to India. So I'm handing over to you to give
Yeah,
them.
I
Yes.
think already the Karnasaka Lakshmi, the elephants were sent from Travancore to Burma.
Wow.
It's already a metaphor of the indentured labors. And also, not only they come to Burma, also they revolt. That's again what in French we call maroonage. I don't know how you call that in English, Ananya.
Maroonage is, I mean, maroons, like the idea of being a maroon, which is a runaway slave, basically. So
Yeah.
a runaway
So-
escapee indentured laborer would be
Okay.
engaging in maroonage, basically.
So already in the Karnasaka, I already put these elements of maroonage, and not only they run away from the plantations, from the rubber plantation in Burma, also they go and meet and make an alliance with other elephant, which I call Gajarastas, with the Rastafaris of Jamaica. So how the indentured laborers from India go and make alliance with the Rastafari Afro descendants and trying to make themselves a new community without hierarchy, without caste, without class. Everybody is equal. The thing, of course, they smoke time to time. It's like to get stoned here and there. But that's my.
Don't confuse the young people, because the whole story is about elephants. I mean, so it's not an elephant. All these groups are groups of elephants. So Ari's Karne Sekre the Lakshmi is an excellent book. It's been translated into English, but he's looking for an English for a publisher. But once it's out, you people will understand that it's really quite a crazy book.
We need to read it.
Yeah,
So
you people will need to read it, because it's really about this, what you're doing work on, this internal bondage, and the fact that the coolie didn't have to travel outside of India to become a coolie. There's a huge coolie creation of this category through movement and migration of labor within the world of South Asia, like land-based, of which Burma, of course, historically at a certain point was, people were moving in and out of, because it was part of the British Empire. So Ari's elephants are doing the same. So, they're very fascinating. But it's really an allegory of the caste system and how, so it's a very powerful book actually about.
So why elephant?
Yeah, Ari, why elephant?
Why elephant?
Yeah.
Actually, your symbol, this elephant reminds me of the Gond, the symbol of the Gond Rajas.
You mean the Gond, the tribe?
The Gond kings.
Yes. Well, Ari.
Yeah. No. To be honest, I need to be honest here. No. I didn't have any particular. I could have taken monkeys. I could have taken snake. I could have taken a rat. But because the elephant Lakshmi is a real elephant which is still existing in the Manakula Vinayagaram temple, the Ganesh temple in Pondicherry. which used to pass in front of my house every
Okay.
day.
Oh,
And I only see the sadness in this elephant, you see. And why do you need to take an elephant and put it inside in a temple to give darshan to people? I don't understand this ritual. It's so stupid, you know. And from that irritation of the stupidity of putting an elephant inside a temple next to a temple and give what do you call uh, benediction to people,
Blessing. Yeah.
blessings, yeah, exactly, not darshan, blessings, so blessing to
yeah.
people. Their irritation built up, and to how to tell the story, and then it went, you know, how the writer do, you know, that's what the fictional writer do. And I created caste, I created the indentured labor, and I created the background history of Pondicherry, how to tell the story of Pondicherry through an elephant. So that's how we started.
But also, I think it's very
Very
important.
interesting.
Yeah, this lovely, this pack of elephants and how they move around from Burma back to, back to South India. That also gave me the theory of this littoral,
Because
circuits.
they start from Travancore.
Yeah,
From Travancore, they go to Burma. From Burma, they come back through Bengal
but
and
they
go
are
to.
going through the coastline. You see, they are traveling not internally in the hinterland, but they're traveling through the hugging the coast. So this coastline as a way of joining the dots, has become more and more important to balance or supplement the transoceanic way of culture forming. So creolization is happening in two ways. So already Lakshmi's journeys, which Ari had charted in the first book of his, helps me plot that, coastal line of movement. But the Chettiars are also very fascinating here. And I think, Pratim,
Chettiars,
you
ask Pratim to come tomorrow. I will not
oh,
reveal anything today.
okay, now you're giving us a clue. Okay, Pratim.
No, Pratim. Okay, so I'll just give you 2 seconds. That Natukota Chettiar, as it's called,
What?
Natukota means
Yes, it's another thing
land.
I would to like. Yes, Aris, go ahead.
The,
Say it
Chet-
again.
the, he
What
wants
did
to
you
know
say?
more about the Chettiars. He wants to know
Yeah,
about the
yeah, that's what I'm
Chettiars.
saying. That's what I'm saying. The Natukota Chettiar, Natukota means Nadu means land, country. Kote means fortress. You see, because their house looks like fortress, they call
Oh,
themselves Natukota Chettiar. But the Natukota Chettiar came only during the 17th or 18th century. But before that, there were different names. They were called Chettiars. They were doing maritime trades in the Chola period. And their base was in Kaveri Pumpati, which is Pumbugar now, right? And Pumbugar faced massive tsunami in 8th century. So they have to move away from Kaveri Pumpattinam, and the King Pandyan king gave them a piece of land inside the country, in the landmass. And because their fear of tsunami, they never wanted to go back and live on the coastal area. So they went and settled down in this place which is called Chettinad now, which is between Madurai and Sivaganga.
yeah.
And then even their house, you can see, and the fear of tsunami is still there. All their houses are elevated; they're not on the ground. You see, that fear stayed back in their mind. And so then again, during the Vijayanagar Empire, they restarted to be a maritime. The meantime, they changed their profession to become moneylenders to
Yeah.
kings, to zamindars, to farmers. So that's how they started to gain fortune. And when the British and the European came, and the Vijayanagar Empire was declining, so the Europeans took them. They said, "Okay, now we'll send you all over because that's what you've been doing." So they went to Burma, they went to Mauritius, they went to East Africa, they went all around the world. And then they came back, and then they found this place. They made this place as a Natukote full of fortress, and they called themselves Natukote Chettiars.
No, they
Valamshi.
are a very, very, very interesting community, and I think they also in the southeast they were building temples, right? Like in Saigon, the
They
big
were, they
temple.
were basically moneylanders. moneylenders. But then again, they were hugely involved in the opium trade. They were the people who were giving money for the opium trade for all these different in the triangle. So that's why come tomorrow, Pratim, and I'll give you more evidence and more juicy informations about the Chettiars.
Yes, I did get this money lending thing actually. I mean, in Uma Prasad, I think is there, and there in Uma Prasad is
But there
finally
are more. There are more.
and yes, and I mean it's finally mentioning that they are sort of like the Marwari of Southeast Asia. It's like
Yeah. Even the project we are doing, me and Pratima, UGC project we're working in on the Burma-India relations. We interviewed many expatriates from Burma, the
Yeah.
repatriates who are now settled in and around Kolkata.
Yeah.
And even they like kind of told us the same thing. They were the Chettiars and the Marwaris of Southeast Asia, of Burma.
It's very interesting,
Well, see-
guys. Because, sorry.
No. If you see
No,
my
no,
last
I-
post of the
yeah.
Kalati Chettiar, that the house of the Kalati Chettiar, it's full of Burmese objects.
Yeah. Teak, for example, obviously wood and jewels and the rest. But the point is that these are the brokers. These are the when I started my talk and I said that our theory of creolization very consciously makes room to try and grasp the role played by brokers, including, of course, merchants are and money lenders are the biggest brokers of all. But the interesting thing is that why do we not imagine that they usually, why don't we usually give them a place in the schema? That's because they're usually very so-called conservative. These groups themselves are very closed. You necessarily wouldn't find evidence that the Chettiars are creolizing by, what I mean? Why they're not they're not entering, they're endogamous, they're not entering into exogamous relations with a whole bunch of people. So the Marwadis are very distinct, the Chettiars are Armenians, Baghdadi Jews. There's no dearth of these mercantile groups, especially in Kolkata. They were gathering in the 19th century like anything. But fascinatingly enough, marriage is not the only way to create a Creole habitus. This is the interesting thing. People stop. They think biology is the only way, that you can creolize or create a culture which is a kind of a response to encounter. There is other things. The way you arrange your house. I mean, look at the Chettiar houses. They may be very conservative in the way they are endogamous or the way they dress themselves, but their homes are crazy. They are full of chandeliers, various kinds of European furnitures, this, that, and the other. So obviously, we have to be a little more probing, and we have to be a little more capacious in our understanding of where does creolization happen? How did these people embrace other cultures? What were the results? How did they influence taste? And practice for not just themselves, what became fashionable because of what they did. So I think these are the ways in which Ari and I are working to even then we somehow find evidence then that communities are very close, like the Chettiars are. Well, I don't know what he's going to show us tomorrow, but clearly it'll be some kind of evidence that will complicate the usual understanding that they were just this closed community. They just lent money. They didn't went here and there, but they themselves were just like sitting in a little cell. I don't think that's really the case. Or even if they were sitting in a little cell, there were other things going on around it. We need to just adjust our vision a little bit. But we are looking forward to whatever you're going to show us tomorrow, Ari. We are all
Guys, come tomorrow. Don't forget the next Adda tomorrow.
This Adda can go on and on, but maybe we should call it an end and make a part 2 tomorrow at on the Tinai. Come and join us there, okay?
Pratim, I'm telling you gonna, even my collaborator is going to fall for my chair, but I'm gonna reveal tomorrow.
Okay, fine. We are waiting.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and Aratrika, if you, I think in here, if you add the text we used to like taught our student, which is like on alien soil, and it's about the Tamil community, the Tamil Kulis, which is like from the, based on Natal, and I think there's like a significant mention of
Salis
how-
body, Southern
Yes, yes.
Rhodesia, basically Rhodesia. Yeah.
Yes, Rhodesia, and like how they are like these Tamil people are like not getting married, but like they are having this relation with the Kafir's women, and how
Yeah.
they're like talking about their, I mean I mean their childrens, and how they are like building up in the Natal area. This was like really fascinating, and I think Artika also like might add something also here.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and like they are marrying the kafir. I mean, they're saying quote unquote kafir. I mean, there's like so many layers of oppression going on. The Indians oppressing the people of African origin, the Britishers oppressing both of them. It's a
Yes.
very different kind of thing going on, and they are creating a different, unique kind of culture.
Yeah.
So it's a kind
Yeah.
of realization going on only.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, if we are thinking of creolization as happening only on some islands, you will not be able to benefit from this theoretical perspective to try and understand or articulate analytically what is happening in a place like the one you're describing, like Natal, or anywhere in South Africa. Again, it's a continental space, but and so there's a hinterland, there are rivers, there are connections, but there are also the ocean, and there are people mingling, and then there are different kinds of communities which are forced to be in antagonism to each other, and yet they are trading, buying and selling, becoming friends, lovers, and so on. So these complexities, it's really interesting the work you're doing. I'm really excited about it, and we'd love to
And
obviously discover more about it as it proceeds. So keep us updated, please.
yes, sure. And also, if Purbasha,
Yes,
I think she's on. No, no, she has unmuted herself. Yeah.
I'm working on memory studies, and I'm working on
Yes.
the Australian Aboriginal people.
Amazing things, people are also
Lovely,
like,
guys.
so imaginative.
Lovely. We
That's
should invite them on one day on a Chennai Creole. Let them come
we
and
should.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So people, let's keep our common threads going, because it's good. It's good that we discover these. This is the archipelago of fragments, frankly. So we should definitely make sure that the dots join up more and more. But thanks a lot for giving us the space to talk about.
Pratikam, Pratim, Purbasha, thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And good work. You're doing excellent work in the group. Very productive. So congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Pratim, if you'll formally deliver the vote of thanks.
Thanks.
Over to you, Pratim.
am I audible?
Yes,
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 you
you're
are.
perfectly
Yes, you
audible.
are.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. On behalf of Team Calcutta Comparatists 1919 and its members, I would
Just at the moment of the vote of thanks, he has become inaudible.
Anyway, so on
That's okay.
behalf of our team, thanks to both of you for coming and join us. It was an amazing session. Thank you once again. And a very good night to all of you.
Good
Please
night to
stay
you.
tuned
Thank you.
and yes, subscribe to our channel for more updates. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank
Be
you.
healthy.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Pratham is stuck.